Welcome to the Brute Strength Podcast, bringing you worldwide experts from all areas of health and fitness. We cover training, nutrition, coaching, and mindset. Welcome your host, strength and conditioning coach, 2012 and 2013 CrossFit Games champ, Michael Cazue. Mind, body, brute.
Hello and welcome back. This is Mike Cazue, and you're listening to the Brute Strength Podcast. This week, I'm joined by a really good friend of mine named Mansal Denton. Mansal is the former owner of a nootropics company called Nootropedia and the current owner of a company called Candor, whose tagline is radically honest food. The company is focused on teaching people how to eat consciously in a way that sets themselves up for the most long-term health, as well as benefits the entire planet in general. A few years ago, Mansal had never hunted in his life, and today he's one of the world's foremost leaders in teaching people how to hunt ethically. And in this episode, we talk a lot about that transformation. How did he go from never hunting before to just being a man on a mission? And it's a fascinating story. We talk about some pretty deep shit, like the meaning of life, the importance of taking as much responsibility as you can bear, and the impact that has on you. And in general, Mansal is just a fascinating guy. He's one of the most focused people I've ever met, and he has some really great strategies for how he does that, kind of in a lifestyle way that I think all of us can learn a lot from. So without further ado, please welcome Mansal Denton. Hey, before we start this show, I want to let you know about something I'm super pumped about right now, which is that I started a second podcast. It's called the WAG Podcast, and I do it with my wife, Adi Cazue. And the reason that we started this second show is because over the past few years, I've had the opportunity to interview some of the best and brightest in the health and fitness space, from New York Times bestselling authors to Olympians and CrossFit Games athletes to NFL coaches to sports psychologists, you name it, a lot of the best and the brightest. And I have also interviewed my wife, Adi, 6 or 7 times. And without fail, the episodes that get the most engagement in terms of direct messages or mentions on social media or emails are all the ones that I do with her. And I think it has something to do with the authenticity of the conversations, the fact that we know each other a little bit better and can pull stories out of the other. And so we decided that we were going to start a second show, and the format is each episode is 20 to 30 minutes on a single topic with actionable steps after each. We talk about nutrition, personal development, mindset, and fitness. And so far, the response has been incredible. So if you're interested in the conversations that we've had on this show, I know you will love that one. So go check it out. Let me know what you think. Let's get into this episode. Dude, I'm fucking pumped to be here with you. You and I have become very close friends over the past year, and I've grown to really admire several things about you. One being the stand that you're taking in the world, which is teaching people about hunting and about doing it in an ethical way. And you just like the things that you are into, you just live it. And I really admire that about you. And I want to talk all about that today. I also admire your ability to create boundaries for yourself, to be more productive, to live a healthier life in a way that really sets you up for truly long-term health, and doing it in a way that is best for the environment, the animals, the earth that we live on. And so I'm really pumped to be here with you, man.
Well, I have to reflect a lot of those things. I have a lot of admiration for you, and it's been a long time since I've become so close as a friend with someone in such a quick period. So I've
right on, man.
it.
So a couple years ago, if I'm correct, that you hadn't hunted ever in your life before a couple years ago. And today you walk into my house and you're wearing a shirt that says "Life Eats Life." You now have a documentary that is all about hunting an elk, bow hunting an elk. You eat over 80% or 90% of food that you have killed. Like you literally live this. So what happened, man?
Well, I think a lot of things, to me, it feels like things happened through me as opposed to necessarily me doing any of those things, if that makes sense. I feel like some higher power has kind of been using me as a channel to bring this message. So, I mean, going back to the first hunt, the impetus or the catalyst for me to do that was just this question that I think many people have, which is, when I think about food, when I think about the meat that I eat, I think about restaurants and I think about the grocery store. And there's a fundamental disconnect there that was intriguing to me, and it compelled me to actually take some action. And I was lucky enough that I could do, an archery hunt and have a pretty profound experience. And I don't know how familiar your audience is with psychedelics, but I was also incredibly lucky that first hunting experience, which was very intimate, was bookended by a couple of pretty serious ayahuasca retreats. And it's a powerful medicine, and it gave me a very specific perspective that kind of pervaded all the things that you've mentioned. And I made some of the commitments that I made were in those ayahuasca experiences, and a lot of the projects that I've come to work on have come out of that work as well.
So this audience is probably not familiar with it at all. So at some point I want you to talk about maybe the history of ayahuasca a little bit, and then what your experience was like. But first off, what was the lesson or the takeaway from that first hunting trip? And then how was it magnified with the psychedelic experience?
Well, the hunting trip itself, it took a little bit of time for it to actually process, but there were certain things that became apparent, and I'm going to get really kind of in the spiritual realm here, but a month before I had gone hunting, I had a vision during ayahuasca where I asked a higher power. This is the first time I'd ever really had any connection to any kind of higher power. And I asked, please, for the sake of the animal, just have a clean shot straight through the heart, kill them quickly and cleanly.
You're having this vision a month before the hunt.
Exactly. Okay. And I'm asking for help, support, whatever higher power there is, help out. And I went on the hunt, and the first thing that struck me was, for the first time that I had ever shot at an animal, somehow I managed to get a heart shot. And that was, the heart is less than the size of a fist. So it's very challenging. The guide almost didn't believe it.
Wow.
So there was something there that kind of felt ordained, so to speak. But, more down to earth, there were things like the antelope that I killed was with a herd, and I remember seeing the other members of the herd, other females, going up to it and looking at it, and I just kind of anthropomorphized, them wondering what happened.
Word mean for people who aren't familiar?
Basically put human emotions and thoughts into an animal. And we know, from a scientific perspective, that mammals have pretty close social ties, and so I could see family members of this animal to some degree mourning the loss. And so I felt that, and I felt a combination in the moment of many different sensations, like pride. There was an extreme sense of happiness and fulfillment that I had done something that I set out to do. There was sadness at seeing the result of it. There was, happiness that I was going to have a chance to eat this meat and finally experience what it was like to kill something and have it for myself. So all those things were kind of swirling around in the trip itself and after the trip. It wasn't until about a month later where I really fully could process some of that experience and turn it into actions.
So, okay, so explain the history of ayahuasca for people and how that kind of catalyzed this whole thing for you.
Sure. Well, ayahuasca has been used in South America, primarily in the Amazon rainforest for thousands of years. I think there's evidence of at least 6,000 up to 12,000 years ago, people have been using this. It's a combination of, there's many different ways to brew it, but primarily it's the ayahuasca vine, which is the translation as like vine of the soul or vine of death, and then some leaves, typically chacruna leaves, and it creates what's called an entheogenic experience, which is basically like a psychedelic experience, but with some kind of natural substance that creates a depiction of or experience of a higher power of some sort. So it's a traditional plant medicine, been used for thousands of years, and only recently is starting to make its way outside of the jungle, and has a lot of scientific healing properties for addiction and trauma and depression and anxiety and things like that.
And it has zero chance of addiction whatsoever, because it is one of the it's one of the most challenging experiences that a lot of people go through, mentally, emotionally, even physically. And yet it had, like, if done safely, it has no negative side effects that I'm aware of.
Yeah, if it's done safely with a shaman, with some type of medical provisions, it's pretty free from side effects, except for people who might already have some kind of like mental disorder, like schizophrenia or something like that.
So yeah, how did this catalyze? How did that experience right after the hunt catalyze you moving forward in this direction? Well,
I knew that I had some processing to do, because it's really, if you look back at an ancestral environment, our ancestors, people had a lot of tools to process things. They had elders in a tribe. They had, all these different rituals that could inform the way that they processed some type of event. Today, we don't really have a lot of that. So I was not really able to process as much as I would have liked. When I went to this retreat, I very much had the intention of processing the experience. So I took the skin with me. I actually had the skin of the antelope. I freaked out all my neighbors who were doing the ayahuasca retreat because I had this skin with a head, on it. And the question that I was having was, how do I develop some sense of connection to the animal and to this concept of like the animal's death, and therefore what does that say about my own death? Like, wow, I'm immortal. And the real catalyst was a specific vision where I recognized that as humans, when we have traumas growing up, that gets stored in our body. It's not just our brains that store these traumas, it's all over our body. And the same could be true for mammals, for any other animal, that they might also, hold this trauma in their bodies. And so I started to put all these connections together. Well, what does that mean for all the animals that I'm eating that are traumatized in, the terrible, terrible conditions that you see on any one of the vegan documentaries?
Right.
And it led me to the realization that the trauma in an animal will literally become a part of me. I eat it, it breaks down into all its constituent parts, and it becomes a part of my muscle that, to regrow and rebuild. And of course, now in a sober context is like, that's kind of self-explanatory, maybe scientific or so. But in that experience of ayahuasca, I felt what that was like. And I made the decision, I don't want to be a part of that anymore.
Wow.
As much as I can help it.
So how did you make the decision to eat almost exclusively your own meat? How did it become such a big, such a commitment?
Well, it was from that, processing that it really came out. I just felt it so powerfully that I didn't want to, be a part, that I just made the commitment there that I was going to continue to have a really close connection to any of the animals that I was consuming. and it in some ways forced me deeper into hunting in order to continue to feed myself. And in many ways, it led me to a bunch of different experiences that have all, helped shape this vision that I have.
So I grew up, I probably started hunting when I was 4 or 5, and I've hunted deer for now 25 years. I've hunted duck and squirrel and all sorts of things. And I've never had even remotely close to the same experience. Why do you think that is? And this experience of like reverence and sacredness of animals and hunting in general.
I think part of it is because I kind of came to hunting in a void. So I didn't have any real preconceived notions or hunting culture that informed how I approached the hunt. It was pretty much my own exploration. I want to do this, and I tried as much as possible to keep an open mind to the different, guides and influences and maybe shows that it might have seeped into my subconscious. But I had, I was very lucky that I could just kind of come into it with a clean slate, so to speak. So I imagine if you hunted when you were younger, you're probably hunting with your family, and there's generations of hunting culture.
Right.
That there's nothing wrong with that hunting culture, but it can be sometimes a little bit disconnected from that
Completely.
reverence piece.
Exactly.
And so, I think that's one thing. The other thing is I really have a very close connection to a lot of the indigenous tribes in North America. I wouldn't say always, but definitely within the last few years had a large interest in some of these tribes, especially like the Comanche, who are here in Texas, who roam through some of the hills that we're sitting in the hill country and stuff. And the Native Americans were incredibly reverent and close to their hunting practice, because generally speaking, it was a source of their sustenance, and it was very much rolled into how they had their religious or spiritual beliefs. So there's a lot of tie-in. And so I think I kind of just picked up pieces of that reverence through learning about Native Americans, and had some Native American teachers like Muskogee Creek elder who I've always had a close connection with in the last 5 years, and that's also helped to inform kind of the perspective that I have.
Gotcha. Yeah, before the really big organized religions like Catholicism and Hinduism and just these giant religions were in existence, when humans worshipped multiple gods, as far as they can tell, as far as anthropologists can tell, they thought of each other as equals to animals. And it's when religion really came into being that this thing called humanism started to take form, where where humans see themselves as superior in some way because we are, quote unquote, more intelligent and powerful than other animals. We definitely won't go into that today, but I think that, how did I even get here? Well, yeah, I think we've just grown away from that belief and that standpoint in such a gross way that's what causes us to put cattle in tiny cages for their entire lives and to treat them as if they don't have the same sort of emotions. Regardless of what the intensity is or how intelligent they are, it's a flavor of the same exact thing. And this idea of humanism is, I think, at fault.
Sure. Yeah. There's a very real, problem. There's obviously plenty of potential benefits that have come with monotheism, but it's interesting you mentioned that, because monotheism was throughout Europe at the time when the Europeans mixed with Native Americans within the American continent. And in Europe, the hunting culture is very much hierarchical. So people, the kings, the aristocracy, they owned the animals, and they therefore were, able to control it. The peasants didn't really, there wasn't a hunting culture in Europe at the time within any of these countries that had monotheistic religions.
No shit.
The Native Americans, on the other hand, were far more egalitarian, and generally speaking, they had a far closer connection to the land, because it was, if you could kill it, then you had the right to kill it. Everybody has a right to eat. And in fact, one of I mentioned something that wasn't so flattering to American hunting culture, but at the end of the day, American hunting culture has a lot of that native perspective infused into it. We have a lot of public land where people can hunt for free in the United States. We have, a lot of initiatives to conserve land, to keep the populations of these wild game animals growing. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that is, at least in some part, rooted in that Native American perspective.
Wow. So how did you kind of transition into having the courage to lead your own guided hunts?
Well, that has come about slowly, and the more I hunt, the more I realize how much I have to learn to hunt. I think part of it was, part of it is having other people who are also there and knowledgeable to support. So, there's a piece that comes with creating the experience, which I want to do, which is really help people who are like me. They're, from the city, maybe never hunted before. How do they experience it in a way that translates for them, that's not off-putting for them? And that's really my responsibility. And then I also have, sometimes I'll bring on like really, really expert hunters who have way more experience with actual hunting, and they kind of inform the hunting piece. Mm-hmm. So, to some degree, I do feel confident in helping people hunt, and to some degree, I also bring in others. But, if I have to speak to one specific thing that helps me with confidence as far as teaching, it's the fact that I bow hunt, and I have bow hunted from the very beginning, which is exponentially harder than rifle hunting. And, you can sit at 100, 200, 300 yards if you're good, and shoot an animal with a gun, and they don't really even know you're there.
Right.
If you're shooting with a bow, generally speaking, I'm shooting under 30 yards. Oftentimes I've shot within like 15. Even, some of the best archers are only shooting at 80 yards. So you're very close to these animals. Right. And it's a lot more intimate, and you have to learn a lot more about how you are in the world, which is something that, people in the city have never really learned, to be quiet, to be stealthy, to be all the things that humans naturally are. I mean, we're apex predators, but we never learned it as young people here.
So since then, you've also, you've begun to create your own documentary called Below the Drop. So can you give us a little synopsis on that? I know it's not yet completed, but what's the synopsis, and what is the goal? What's the intention of the documentary?
Yeah, well, really, my goal is to help spread a message that conscious hunting with reverence, can help individuals really become closely connected to the food that they eat. But more importantly than that, because I know many people aren't going to go out and hunt, is that hunting allows me to see that death. It allows me to meditate on it every meal that I eat, that something has to die in order for me to live. And that's the key. Something has to die in order for me to live. And I want more people to remember that fact, because when we remember that, we can take care to be more mindful in the world with what we're doing, whether it's what we're eating, whether it's what we're throwing away, whatever the case may be. Just be mindful that something's dying. That's kind of my objective with it. And that was, again, this is why I say that so much of this is kind of a message that's coming through me as opposed to, me forcing something. One of the men who was at a ayahuasca retreat with me before the hunt is a director. He's a producer of film. He's won awards at Sundance Festival, etc. So he's like very credentialed, and he kind of caught wind of the commitment that I had made and some of the explorations that I was doing, and he was interested in doing a documentary. And so to some degree, these other people and these other concepts like he had helped me move further into this direction, because I had thought of hunting as just like a side thing. Oh, I'm making this commitment to myself, but it's not really part of my professional life or anything. So he really helped push that in that direction.
Very cool, man. So that's a good segue. I have a quote from that I got from you about the documentary, and it goes, "Everything dies, and yet we live in a society conditioned to deny death. It may be for this reason that many, at the time of their dying, feel so confused, even guilty. What is the root of this guilt accompanying the experience of death? Could it be born from a fear that we never learned how to live? Could it be that our fear of death is directly equatable to our fear of life?" Can you unpack this for a little bit for us?
Yeah. Well, first of all, that was if you got that from the deck, that was Barlow's fine handiwork.
Gotcha.
He's the director of the film. Yes.
Poetic.
I think that it's because I didn't write it, I won't like riff too closely on it. I'll just kind of riff on my own ideas. But I do think that the further we have moved from the death of animals, staring death in the face in the same way that our ancestors would have done even a couple hundred years ago, the more we seem to fear our own death. It's almost like it's not only that we can say out of sight, out of mind for the food that we eat, because that's very easy. But partially, I think there's some kind of psychology going on collectively where we're really trying to put the whole idea of death out of sight, out of mind. It's especially today with, there's all types of people talking about uploading consciousness to the AI or to the cloud, and artificial intelligence combining with our biological
people
systems.
Trying to become immortal.
Exactly. Yeah, and all of these things, and I think historically you can look at tons of myths and things like that, kind of reflect humanity's fear of death. Partially, I think that's just a factor of we can really clearly think about past, present, future, etc. So we know we're going to die and everything. But I think a lot of it comes down to being so disconnected from it on a regular basis. Because Native Americans, there's, I don't remember what exact language, but hokahe is like, today's a good day to die. Is kind of a philosophy of a lot of indigenous people, which is, they had a very close relationship with death, whether it's in combat, whether it's, the death of feeding their families or famine or sickness. Our ancestors were surrounded by death. Now we are literally as insulated from it as possible.
Right. So death is a huge part of this documentary and what we're talking about right now. What's the benefit of having a different relationship with death for people?
Well, I think it definitely offers people a greater perspective on how they can live. And or look at any life hacker, any kind of like organization that's trying to teach people how to live better. They are kind of creating all these different tactics, and you can do this. But what if you had this perspective, really not just knowing, because we all know at some level that we're going to die, but more importantly, embodying it at a physical level? It's very clear, and I'm still working on this, that we're going to die. And that might allow somebody to not push off that vacation to the destination that they want to visit, or the person who says they want to go hunting, but they've never, taken the opportunity to do it. Don't let life pass you by. Go do something.
Right.
Whatever it is that lights you up, that is calling to you, recognize that we have a finite period on this planet, and it's worth really considering that when you're balancing the obvious necessities and responsibilities that come with life, but also the finality of it.
That's beautiful, man. And for those of you who don't know the word embody, I think what you mean is like to be present to that fact that we will die. And if I don't do this thing that I really want to do, like I deeply desire to do now, I may never do it, right? Because we can die in a car in 10 minutes, right? All of us are driving cars. Most of the people listening could die at any minute. And so we need to ask ourselves, are we living in a way that that really reveres the fact that we could die at any moment? That's beautiful, man.
Thank you.
So what have you learned so far throughout this process of making the documentary about yourself?
I think the most important thing that I've had to come to is that it's not about me. And it's really nice to see the deck that I shared with you and see that I'm the subject, and that, if it does well, it could be seen by millions of people, and there's delusions of grandeur that come with that. And I have to continue to remind myself, both with this project, with every other project that's in my orbit right now that focuses on these concepts, that it's not about me at all. It is. I have the spiritual teacher I told you, Will. The way he always says it is, the plants chose you. The plants chose you to be a voice for this message, because the earth is suffering. The earth is, humans are degrading a lot of the environmental aspects of the planet and things like that. And so we kind of have a responsibility as the sentient beings that we are to fix it. And so it's really been a constant like ego check and humility check to be focused more on that, and to be able to just put my thoughts about what should be this way or that way aside, and just kind of like focus on the bigger mission. Because all that kind of sounds like coming that I'm kind of riding a high horse, but I have a lot of empathy for us as a species, because like we're very newly technologically advanced. We've still got a lot of our animal instincts. After all, we are animals. And I think we have a really great opportunity now to rally together and save the planet and bring back, a lot of the ecosystems that we may have destroyed in our ignorance in the past. Right.
And even if you're not as mystical or woo-woo as Mansal, I think there's something really amazing in what you're talking about looking at it as if you are, like something is working through you and you're representing the human species. Someone that both of us follow is Jordan Peterson, and he talks about this equation for like finding meaning in life being that the amount of meaning you are connected to or feel is directly correlated with the burden that you take on in the world, right? The amount of responsibility that you are willing to endure. And you're taking on the responsibility, like an enormous responsibility of just showing people or connecting people to the food that they eat, so that in fact we can, like every person can sort of save themselves and experience life in a better way, but also we treat animals better, we treat the earth better, and it seems to have a really enormous effect on, like for you to see it that way seems to have a really profound effect on the way that you're going through life. Like you feel like your life is more meaningful.
Absolutely. Yes, I feel way more fulfilled, in alignment, mission-oriented, And, we talked a little bit about on the podcast about some of the productivity stuff that I do.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the main motivators of that. And, I don't look at Elon Musk in romantic terms as far as how much he works and how hard it is on his body. I mean, there's literally articles about how he struggles with that. So I don't take it to a martyrdom perspective.
He's had like a terrible relationship and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So I don't want to be a martyr, but I want to really take that, responsibility and take the burden, because somebody's got to do it. And
totally, man.
It feels like it's coming through me.
Yeah, I really envy that you've found that thing for yourself, at least in this chapter of your life. Something that I've heard quite a bit, and it's really stuck with me over the past like 5 to 10 years is, what are you willing to die for? That question, what are you willing to die for? What are you willing to struggle for? And I've definitely found things that I'm willing to struggle for, but I haven't found that thing that I'm willing to just devote my entire life to, and I think it's a worthwhile thing for people to strive towards. And so it's amazing that you found that thing.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. And to add to that phrasing, because that specific phrasing has come up for me, is like, what are you willing to die for? Because the truth is, you're dying for whatever you're doing right now.
True that.
Every hour you spend, every day you spend working on something is a day you're never going to get back.
Right.
So be mindful of that. And I hope everybody can find that.
Amazing. So before you were into hunting, you were really into nootropics. And just to really simplify it for people who don't even know what nootropics are, it's like smart drugs, right? Smart supplements.
Yes, they're basically synthetic or natural substances that improve mental performance without a serious risk of side effects.
Gotcha. So the reason I want to talk about, next I want to talk about basically the research that you're doing, because you're putting out a lot of content, you're preparing for this documentary. And I remember the first time I ever went to your house, the first time I met you, I look on the table and there's like a dozen books on like almost the same exact topic. And I just made this mental note. I'm like, damn, this dude goes really in depth, and I was a little intimidated. And that's also one of those things that I said I really admire about you, like your ability to focus and go really deep. And so first off, what are you doing nootropics wise, nutrition wise, that's really setting your physiology up to go in depth and really stay focused and operate at your best?
Yeah. Well, one thing I was really adamant about whenever I talked about nootropics on a broader scale with my previous business was how important lifestyle was as a foundation. And so for me, sleeping is, a major part of optimizing my physiology. I go to bed like pretty early, like 9:30, 10, and I generally wake up whenever my body tells me to. Usually it's like 6:30 or so. As far as diet's concerned, typically I'm either paleo-ish or I'm even keto for the last like month or so. And I'm kind of cyclical. So like on a Friday after super heavy lifts or something, I might have some carbs just to refill the glycogen. So, I mean, that's diet and sleep, and everybody's got to kind of find what works best for them.
Let me ask you a quick question about that. How long have you done no alarm?
That's a funny story. So I've done no alarm for probably 2 years or so. And beforehand, I was waking up at 5:30 every morning. Super intense. I actually loved it because it was like, for some reason, the waking up to an alarm created a sympathetic response. So my body was like more activated, more alert than it is now when I get a full night of sleep. But it really compromised my immune system. So I had some like health stuff that came up, and I was just like, why the heck am I doing this? I mean, I really love the way that I was, pretty much done with work by noon, because I had, just woken up and went straight to work. But I don't, for me, And that's the key for all this stuff, is like, for me, that doesn't work anymore. I don't really want to do that.
Yeah, I've been playing around with it, but I'm kind of scared of what will happen, and I'm scared of like sleeping for 10 or 11 hours, because I don't necessarily, like, times that I don't have an alarm, I will wake up, but then I'll just allow myself to go back to sleep, and I'm kind of worried that will happen a bunch. But on the other hand, I feel like I will probably quickly adapt to that. That might happen for a few days, and then I'll start to develop this awareness. I'll start to develop this awareness when the first time I wake up and just get out of bed. Did you struggle with it at first?
I don't, but I know my body and my, like, how I operate pretty well. So I wake up pretty consistently with the sun. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm a morning person big time. So I'll pop out of bed and I'll be happy and jumping around, and my girlfriend hates it. Mallory just hates how happy I am. And she has a similar thing as you, where she can kind of go to bed the same time as me, but she can sleep in because her body just, allows her to continue sleeping. She doesn't have that same response.
Right.
So yeah, you might have a period of kind of rebound sleep where you're just kind of catching up, and then you might have, you might level off after that.
Gotcha.
But yeah, it's definitely important for everybody to kind of find their personal groove, so to speak.
So we were talking about like setting the foundation, the lifestyle for being productive and mentally clear, and you were getting into nootropics.
Yeah. So with diet, sleep covered, the nootropics that I use are honestly pretty darn simple. They're obviously, people use caffeine. I try and use caffeine with something that has a lot of research and synergy called L-theanine. It's an amino acid that's in green tea, and it's literally the most well-researched combination. Caffeine, L-theanine in a 1-to-2 ratio. And for people who are listening, you can just have a cup of coffee and you can buy L-theanine powder and just add it to the coffee. It doesn't really change the taste that much. Mm-hmm. I will also use nicotine gum in super small doses. I'll use another nootropic called phenylparastam, about 100 milligrams, which is a synthetic drug developed in the 90s that it was used in the Soviet Union for treating Alzheimer's and dementia and stuff, but it's actually like stimulating and really great for verbal fluency. So when I have podcasts or different...
Are you on it right now?
I'm not, because if I was...
You would go to sleep.
Well, I wouldn't be able to go to sleep. So for verbal fluency, it's really great. And then there's obvious options of like, microdosing, like LSD or psilocybin and things like that.
But that would be crazy. You'd never do that.
I would never do that. Never. But so those core kind of compounds can be really helpful. I try these days to move towards as much like whole food kind of ingredients as possible. So people probably have heard of butter coffee or bulletproof coffee. Mm-hmm. And my partner and I developed a latte, which is basically has MCT powder and coconut milk, as well as caffeine and L-theanine. So it's a lot of these compounds that I have mentioned. And it's just a lower quantity of caffeine, because we're really trying to encourage people to question their relationship with caffeine. Mm-hmm. So I'll have that, and I'll even have that later in the day sometimes, because it's lower in caffeine to kind of, pick me up again. But honestly, the nootropics feel great, and they are definitely the way to go from like 100% to 105%. But some of the biggest things that I've done for my productivity are structural in nature. I have a backbone of structure in place
in your like weekly schedule and the way that you operate.
Yeah. So some people, like, you might think that I work a ton. I, generally speaking, probably don't work more than like 6 hours a day, but they're super, super focused. So like, I don't sleep with my cell phone or my laptop even in my room. I leave my cell phone at the front of my door or near my door the whole day.
When you're working.
When I'm working.
Yeah.
I mean, all the different tools. Inbox when ready, so I don't check email till noon. I have just done so much of this stuff that it's gotten me into the habit of really selecting the communication that I have with care so that all my mind space can be focused on whatever like task is at hand. So, you know, I mean, a lot of this is more new. I've had plenty of problems with social media. Digital minimalism is a really good reminder for people about kind of getting rid of some of the distractions. And then I have a daily system set up where I basically plan out the next day every single day.
And is that building a second brain?
No, that's
Okay.
not.
What is your, before we get into that, what is your system for planning out what you're going to do the next day?
So I have a to-do list,
Okay.
and I have a pretty intuitive understanding of my mental capacities. And so early in the morning, I put 2 or 3 of the most important and cognitively demanding tasks. That could be like something super creative, some brainstorming, something that's just like very high importance. Then I will have, you know, a couple smaller tasks, go to the gym, and then do more small tasks and meetings and stuff in the afternoon. And adhering to this schedule, and most importantly, planning ahead of time is super helpful for me, because think about how much energy you expend sitting down at your desk trying to figure out what you need to do next. I completely eliminate that by doing that the day before.
Right.
And of course I have flexibility if something comes up, but generally speaking, I know what needs to be done during the day, and it just allows me to like focus on it immediately.
So yeah, talk about building a second brain, because this is crazy.
Yeah. Well, the concept of building a second brain is created by Tiago Forte, and some pretty influential people have been using it. That's kind of where I heard Tim Ferriss, and then I think Patrick Collison, the founder of Stripe, both mentioned using it. And it's a system to it's a knowledge management system. So it helps to categorize, manage information, actionable items in your life, and things like that. And, you know, what I do in the nootropics world, there's a lot of, I'll give you an example so that people can kind of understand what this might look like. There's a lot of studies that I look at. You know, maybe some of your audience is interested in like strength-based studies, performance.
There are tons of coaches and physical therapists and chiropractors listening.
Yeah, so you have that study, and maybe you cite it more than one time, and so you either have it saved to favorites or whatever the case may be. But a better way that I've found to do it is following Tiago Forte's plan, where I essentially put the study into a note in Evernote. I then highlight certain pieces that are really important, bold other pieces, and create kind of a hierarchy of what's of most importance within that study. And then if it's really important, I might have a summary at the top. And so I start to create this bank of studies and articles and concepts and, you know, brainstorming sessions in my Evernote, and I can refer to them whenever I want. When I'm writing a piece, I can just type in the search and it'll come up with a relevant option. And more importantly, not only is it the relevant study that I'm looking for, but it's already bolded and highlighted and summarized for me. So I'm not even going back down the rabbit hole of trying to figure out what's important about this study. So it really makes the creative process, which is very important to me, a lot easier and a lot more efficient. They also have a really great feature where you just bring up like a random note. It's literally called Random Note. So you're writing some kind of creative work, and you can pull up a random note from Evernote that can give you inspiration or spark some new, creative ideas or whatever. But so the whole system is based around like 4 different categories. You got projects, areas, resources, and then archives. And it's meant to be that most actionable ones are projects, like to-do items. And, I'll let people, if they really want to like learn more about it, go see Tiago Forte. But it is by far one of the most effective systems that I've used to not only help my productivity, because that's like only one part of life, but just maintain the important information and just cool ass shit that I have found somewhere on the internet that I want to be able to share with people readily.
That's amazing, dude. And yeah, it's so funny that I was reading that book, Getting Things Done. So I had this business coach, guys, this new business coach that is trying to help me with task management. I have a lot of new responsibilities and I was feeling really overwhelmed by them. And so he put me on this book called Getting Things Done, which is a super famous book for that. A lot of business leaders end up following this system for getting their tasks done and organizing them. And I also, I was talking to you about building a second brain, and I was trying to decide which one I was going to do because they sounded so similar. And then I researched Tiago Forte, and then I found out that he offers a course teaching people how to implement getting things done. And so to this day, that's the first thing, like as soon as I start work, I go through my getting things done system. I decide exactly what I'm going to do for the day. And it's just this elaborate but very simple to use system that helps me never worry about remembering when I have to do something, because I have a system that I rely on and that I trust. And then when I'm actually going and doing work, I am so much more productive, and I never put off the really hard things. At least I haven't really experienced that yet. And it's the way that that's set up, and that's called getting stuff done like a boss. It's a more watered down version of what you're talking about, but it's been just life changing for my work.
Well, that's beautiful. Yeah, anybody who can find a system that works is on the right path.
So let's close with more hunting stuff. I love this quote by Winston Churchill that goes something like, "A man is as big as the things that make him angry." A man is as big as the things that make him angry. And there's not much of a bigger idea or a thing to make you angry than how we treat animals and the effect that all of it is having on the planet as a whole. So what has taking this sort of stand had on you personally? Like, what kind of, going back to that meaning piece, what's been the impact on you?
Well, I think it's a constant practice in that I sometimes feel like I've bitten off more than I can chew. And, being fully transparent, there are times where I forget that I have this responsibility, or I get sucked into thinking about, monetary, financial aspects of business a little too heavily and whatnot.
You think about money sometimes? That's disgusting.
I know. I self-flagellate myself for things like that as well. So, yeah, by no means perfect, but I think, like I said, it's a constant practice, and it's constantly a humbling practice. And one of the things that's stood out the most has actually been like being in the arena and hunting as much and as often as possible, because as much as the things in our world, in our cookie cutter civilization world, will challenge us, they're not going to challenge us as much as the real world is going to challenge you.
Right.
Because as beautiful as Earth is and all of the animals are, it also is, it's neutral to our feelings and desires. So it's also equally brutal when you get out there.
Right.
And, it's brutal for me to have to, it's brutal and beautiful for me to have to grab the antlers of a buck who's wounded and look it in the eye and stab it behind the shoulder and watch the life drain out of it. And experiences like that are the most profound reminders of what's important. And I know somebody listening to this, who's a vegan, thinks that it sounds completely contradictory, but I've never loved animals and wanted to preserve the planet as much as when I'm hunting. And, maybe that's just the fact that it's a moment where I can be out in nature, in unadulterated nature. It's not a park that's manicured for humans. It's not a backyard. It's just unadulterated nature in all its splendor and brutality. That is kind of the practice that keeps me focused on the larger picture of, trying to solve the challenges that we have.
How do people relate to you now that you're on this mission? Like when I think about you in my mind, I'm like, oh, that's Mansal. He's on a fucking mission. How do people relate to you differently or treat you?
That's a good question. I think a lot of people consider me to be in some other universe as far as, how I talk
like he's
about.
cray-cray.
Yeah, completely. And, talking about higher powers, talking about like something flowing through me and being like the ultimate form of hippie, like crunchy as far as trying to save the planet and everything's concerned. So, I had that kind of subconscious voice in the back of my head that's apparent at times. But generally speaking, I'm really glad if it creates that dynamic for people, because those are the types of people that, God bless them, they just aren't on the same wavelength or in alignment with what I'm trying to do. And those people are, I love them, but we're just not gonna vibe.
Yeah.
And so I haven't really noticed a ton of those people necessarily. I've definitely noticed a lot of people who resonate with the idea, maybe have never hunted before, but are like really, really into it. Especially a lot of men from cities who are just kind of like really compelled to make some kind of a commitment similar to that. But you ask a hard question, because it's hard for me to really detect how people change in their perception of me. Whether they show it to me or whether I even notice it at all is kind of challenging. But I hope that I inspire others to, go down whatever rabbit hole suits them, but at the very least question, like, something died for me to get to live another day. So
yeah, and I think that just from my own experience, and I think I don't know, I think I have a good intuition about other people's perceptions and things like that. I think there's a deep respect of having the courage to just be so committed to something you really believe in. Just to be all in on something is just so compelling. And I think really all of us want to find that thing for us. A lot of people, I think, find that in raising children, which is beautiful. A lot of people find that in their careers. Some people just find it in charity work that they do. But I think all of us deeply want to find that thing that we're willing to die for. And so I think there's a deep respect and inspiration for the people that it doesn't make feel smaller, right? They're not comparing themselves to you. I think it's really inspirational for people like me to be like, all right, he can do it, I can do it, right? So it's awesome, man. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's good to have that reflection, and I think, everybody has an opportunity to find that for themselves. I think I'm really lucky that I found this, and I think there's probably something a lot deeper from our ancestral past that's coming out. This is like the ultimate thing that a man would find fulfilling, like, thousands of years ago. So I think I get a real chance to like play on something like that.
Awesome, man. So you have a documentary called Below, what is it?
Below the Drop.
Below the Drop coming out soon. Well, not necessarily soon, but at some point in the future. You do guided hunts where you're helping people really connect to hunting in an ethical way, with expert guides, with the entire ritual around it. Where can people find out more about you personally and find out about your hunts and your content and all of it?
Sure. So the main, portal, I guess, for the hunts specifically for people who want to, find out more and sign up would be choosecandor.com. So that's just choose and then CANDOR.com/apex, APEX. And they can find all the details about the hunts there. Then,
what's your MySpace, by the way?
Oh, I forgot my logins. I have my own MySpace now. I created it and got it up and running today. It's my personal website, mansaldenton.com,
Nice.
MANSAL Denton.com. And on my personal website, for people who resonate with the hunting, I've started to create, basically they're like after action reports. So I do a summary of the whole hunt and some key takeaways that I am still learning about hunting, which are a little bit more nuanced. You won't find them in a book or anything like that. So if anyone, wants to, check them out for entertainment or education, whatever, go to my website.
Sweet, man. Go check it out, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks, brother.
Thank you.
This episode is finished, but your training journey continues. Head over to brutestrengthtraining.com/SSW and grab your free pack of 32 accessory workouts that you can incorporate into your training and start improving your strength immediately. That's brutestrengthtraining.com/SSW.